Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today I have a very special and different episode. This is an in-person interview that I did at my alma mater, Michigan State University, at a dairy symposium that was held there. I want to thank Dr. Barry Bradford for inviting me to speak there with our guest for today, Nickolas Badminton. We had what we called a fireside chat, and Nickolas is a futurist. And we were talking about what we can expect or what we think might happen in the future. I really enjoyed having this opportunity to be in front of many people that I respect in the dairy industry in the Midwest and being a part of the event there at Michigan State, and just appreciate them allowing me to record it as well for this podcast. So thanks to them, and thanks to Nickolas for being a part of this episode. We spent a little bit of time diving into quite a few different topics around technology, artificial intelligence, and where we saw the future potentially going in agriculture. Nickolas opened up the symposium with kind of a keynote speech and then closed it as well with another keynote, and did a really good job framing some of the discussion that we had at the symposium that day. But a lot of that is captured in a pretty concise format here in this episode. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to share with the rest of the world what we got to experience that day. So take a listen. Hope you enjoy this interview that I did with Nickolas Badminton. Thank you. We're going to get right into it, but I know this is a really, really dangerous time slot right after lunch, and we have a futurist and a farmer that loves technology that just spent the year traveling around the world studying technology, and they gave us 3 hours to talk. So
great, let's go.
It's going to be a great time. I'm really looking forward to this.
Get tea.
We're going to get right into it. The themes of the day are food, people, and energy, right? So, Nickolas, let's go through those. I've got some questions prepared here. As we talked this morning on some of these topics, we're yet to hear about the energy panel that's coming next after us. But I wanted to start out with a question a little different than what the last panel talked about. They kind of touched on it a little bit. But what do agricultural institutions like Michigan State University need to do to embrace the change that's coming and stay relevant in education and specifically?
In education, I think it was really interesting. The second panel was talking about talent and the identity. What does it mean to be a farmer? What does it mean to do that job? How can you reinforce good ways of working, like picking up the phone, being proactive, being communicative, whereas we've got a lot of kids that are sort of defaulting into something that's a bit more passive, right? So, I mean, I kind of start there. It's with a human operation in the modern world, and also interesting there as well is like attracting them with money in the situation. But when we think about bringing people in to work in this industry, to really get excited about technology and get excited about the dynamics of it, it's really about creating a frame about where we're going. When I chat to companies and when I chat to boards of directors, especially smaller companies, that they struggle with, the dynamics on their board of directors or their marketing or whatever, it's because they don't have this vision of like where they're going to be in 20 years' time. Mm-hmm. If you don't know where you're going, and then no one can really follow you to like where you're going, because you're literally turning corners every quarter to basically try and pivot and change and turn. And you can still pivot and change and turn and evolve and innovate. But if you've got something that's anchoring you in 20 years' time, I mean, I hate to say it, but Elon Musk was one of the big examples I used to say. SpaceX was around for a long time, and then he started delivering on the grand vision, right? And I think when you look at the S&P 500, you look at some companies, not necessarily in the ag field, the average age is less than 18 years. And the companies that have been around for a long time have got a long vision and they've got a long idea. Like a company like SoftBank in Japan, that's obviously got some of its fingers in the ag pie, as it were, in the food business. It's got a 300-year strategy. And it's got a 30-year strategy that's based on a number of different factors and holding companies that's then got the ability to accelerate to 300 years. And I think we need to see more of that here, right? That was a long-winded way of kind of dancing around that question.
No, that's all right. We'll give it to you. So we talked about in this last panel about the opportunity to train new entrants into the industry. As agriculture, we've kind of had this stigma around working in agriculture and trying to find people to do sometimes menial tasks, sometimes really advanced tasks on the farm. One thing that I wanted to get your take on, so I spent the last year traveling around visiting businesses in technology and farms in technology all around the world through a program called Nuffield Scholars. And in that, one thing that really came to mind was the with technology that obviously the younger generation is into, is we now have the opportunity to, I think, show the why behind what we're doing a little bit more than we have in the past, especially in agriculture. I think that's been something that's hard to dig up when we hire somebody, get out there and start milking, right?
Yeah.
Whereas today we have the technology to say, like, I have milking robots on my farm. I haven't had anyone on my farm that's actually come from a farming background before that was working on my farm. They all kind of came to work for us from outside the industry. And we were able to teach these non-cow people really technical things about dairy farming, and about cow health and how to handle cattle, because they were into technology, and therefore they would learn and want to grow in how to learn about cows based off of looking at the computer screen. Right. Very different than most of the cow people in this room. Right. They got that through osmosis, through living on a dairy farm for 40 years. Whereas these young people got to have that experience really quickly, and they actually picked it up extremely quickly because they were into technology. So where have you seen that? And if you want to take that from where I left off.
For me, it's all about transformation, right? So I come from a management consultancy background, recovered or recovering. But what's really interesting, you look at people, process, technology, governance, data, regulation, the whole shebang, right? And I think that what you're finding is that the folks are turning up with technology as the enabler for all of that to happen, versus if you're coming from a traditional operational background, you're coming from a traditional operational set of processes, and then you have to learn tech, and then you have to overlay that, and then you have to almost do two levels of transformation. The transformation to become a technologically minded person, and then the transformation of your business to work in new ways. Whereas you've got this benefit of like working in new ways. People come in and they're passionate about that, and they can learn the business of cattle and cows and that side of things because they've got the basis of data and analytics. And I actually think that data science is like a major capability in almost every business around the world. I've been speculating about this for a while. I think we're in the world of the farmer scientist, the farmer data scientist, cybersecurity. There's going to be more technologies from a sensor fusion perspective in the mix, possibly swarm robotics and such like. I mean, you've got robotic milking, right? Yeah. But there's one thing to buy technology and apply it, and there's another thing to adopt a new way of working, and that new way of working is supercharged through technology, right? Yeah. If that makes sense. So, transformation, and it's the most difficult thing to do, and that's why change takes so long. But with change, you either change or change happens to you. Right. So there's that pressure as well. Pressure to invest, pressure to build capability, pressure to hire the right people. And it's very, very difficult, right? Because change can happen fairly quickly. We've seen it economically with some of the decisions that have been made in the last few months. And then how do you react? It's a knee-jerk situation, and it's uncomfortable and whatever. But running through the middle of that is that strong line of transformation of the business to be sustainable and resilient.
You mentioned robotics, and I want to talk a little bit more about that, and that wrapped in artificial intelligence. So Gordy Jones, on one of the last, I think it was the last panel, the panel before that, talked about the cow pusher as being the most important position on the farm, right? Because they're seeing everything they're seeing the whole farm every day in their shift, right? And they're responsible for handling the entire herd of cows. That position usually, as he said, is a low-paid position. So one thing that I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on is where are things going with humanoid-type robots in the future, and where a humanoid robot can probably do what most would consider a menial task of kicking the cows up out of the stalls and bringing them up to the parlor. Where I saw an example of this in an orchard, a very highly advanced orchard in New Zealand on my travels, where they did a menial task of spraying the orchard, but now their sprayer was outfitted with a lot of camera and visual technology that they were grading and coloring and deciding on the amount of apples that they wanted to have on the trees, and if they needed to spray to get rid of some of the apples. And so it was doing 4 or 5 different tasks that a very high-level manager would make decisions on. Right. It was doing that, getting that information to make those decisions. At the same time, it was doing a menial task. So do you see that happening in the livestock sector?
I mean, was that actually a humanoid robot?
That was just a sprayer outfitted with that technology, but it's the same example as that unit is going around the entire farm very regularly, whereas a cow pusher is doing the same thing on a dairy farm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of investment. There's a huge amount of hype and buzz around humanoid robotics. It kind of all started with Boston Dynamics, right? The backflipping and dancing robots. It dances and backflips because it wants to it wants to take your attention away from the actual practical things that it can really, really do in a context of industrial farming or in a factory or whatever, right? Something like the Spot robot that's running around, or smaller robots that have got specific particular functions, or larger robots that can be outfitted with a number of different things is kind of where we're headed towards. Because, why do we want to just build clumsy humans to run around orchards or run around operations? I mean, a human to kick a cow to get it in somewhere versus some kind of machine that actually does it better than that situation, maybe using a different kind of method or sound or compressed air or whatever, right? And that's what's exciting about robotics to me. And I know people that are building companies like Sanctuary AI. I mean, I know there's Tesla robot and whatever. There's been a whole bunch of buzz on the TED stage recently. I'm over it. I'm over the humanoid robot. Like we like to assume that this humanoid function is really effective. There's something called Moravec's paradox. When you've got a cognitive task where you do task 1, task 2, task 3, transform data, put it into different files or send an email or whatever, that's actually quite easy because it's cognitive. It can be encoded. When you're doing something like picking up a cup and filling it and doing a number of different things that are practical, it's incredibly difficult because motor skills are a level of infinite complexity versus cognitive skills. So Moravec's paradox sort of talks about that and how it's going to take a long time to get there. So are we going to wait for a perfect humanoid robot? No. What we're going to have is 10 small box-like robots doing really cool things very, very quickly and effectively that could be prototyped, rolled out, innovated, and incrementally changed, and then put together in whole new ways, maybe modularly. And then that could be really interesting to me, right? So I'm thumbs down on humanoid robots, even though it's science fiction and, wouldn't that be cool? You could ask yourself a question. Would you like another employee in that place or another person in your home getting in the way just because they can make the dishes? Maybe slightly worse than you can. I don't think so.
And I think that's a good aspect to bring up is Michelle was talking about it in the last panel, we're always going to need those people that are able and capable of pulling a calf when there's a difficult calving,
for sure,
or giving the vaccinations, or those type of things that just take a lot of really coordinated motor skills that you can't get from robotics.
Or who's going to clean the robot? I always talk about cleaning robots. Who's going to clean the cleaning robot? Another cleaning robot? Who's going to clean the cleaning robot that cleans the cleaning robot?
What if they clean each other?
What if they clean each other? Quickly, create a pattern, right? Or self-cleaning robots. Anyway, we've got this constant situation of situational and contextual capabilities where humans are in the mix, which is pretty much everything in the world. It's always going to have a human hand. It's interesting. In 1900, 40% of Americans worked on farms. Now it's less than 3%, I think. So some numbers, I might be slightly off. And a lot of those folks are immigrants, right? And we're actually seeing a bit of a labor crunch on that front now. And there is this big push in robotics and the such like. But we move from capabilities and going back to the farmer scientist or the farmer data scientist perspective. The people that program, the people that coordinate, it's like a ballet, right? The people that orchestrate everything working together, it's going to be a very complex and complicated way of operating, almost akin to military operations. So military operations, as an analog to this, are going fully autonomous, controlled by satellites and coordinated and decisions being made, critical decisions being made. Very similarly, to the context of what's going to be happening on farms.
Yeah.
Right. And then how do you manage that? How much do you have hands-on? How much do you take your hands off just to run it efficiently? How much does it learn? I mean, we're still a long way away from having machine learning that's really on top. And when, say, you've got 25 suppliers providing incredible robotics and systems and whatever, they're not going to hang together still.
Right.
So
that's a great point. How do we as an industry, I mean, there's a lot of those people in this room today that have that piece of technology.
Yeah.
How do we marry all of that data together to make it a way that a farmer like myself can make a good decision and not spend the entire day trying to just piece together this data?
This is the problem with standards and technologies and market share and investment and protecting your IP and the problems. And I hate to say this, the consolidation and the acquisition by the big tech players are somewhat helping that.
Right.
But do we want Google to own our entire farm operations?
Probably not.
Well, but we know that they've stepped into the arena, right? Right. And
same with Microsoft.
It's the same with Microsoft. And I've been following that over the last few years. Who owns your data? Who owns that capability? Hey, software as a service, like your entire farm as a service, pay monthly. It's fine. Change the entire business model until you're like hamstrung and you've invested all this technological capability, and you have to sign into a plan for the next 25 years with no real control and ownership of data and such like, right?
Right.
It's very tricky, and the big conversation around who owns the data and who owns the knowledge and who owns the capability to run that independently is going to be even more pressured, especially as we get, fewer farms and fewer operations, and even and less people running it all, and that need for automation. The big conglomerate capabilities are sort of coming into the mix. We've seen it a lot in protein, right? In raising cattle and producing beef and the such like. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting dynamics right now around that, right?
Right. And I think going to the point that you brought up a few seconds ago about complexity to the system, that's the one thing I think that attracts a lot of farmers to be a farmer is It's a complex thing. Every day is different. Every year is going to be different. That's one thing that draws us, probably one of the things that frustrates us the most as well. But that's where I really get excited about where artificial intelligence is going. Is it's something that can process a vast amount of data that a human brain maybe can look at 4 or maybe even 5 different aspects of data to make a decision. Whereas some of these models that are being trained now, even today that are in their infancy, can take in thousands of different connections of data points and see the trends and help make better decisions based off of so many different dynamics that are going on in a very complex system.
You know what? Earlier in my keynote, I sort of speculated about creating a GPT that's specific for veterinarians, or say if you've got an AgGPT, which is another riff on the idea, and you can take all that data and you can build that model and you can operate that model. I think, and this is what a reality of the situation is going to be. The model very quickly goes out of date. So you're constantly feeding and training and changing and feeding and changing and trying to transform at the same time. And you end up like being a babysitter for your technological capability in a way, right? Whereas, so I think it's really important to create that balance of human and the machine. Whereas you give it some things it can do very quickly and easily that can be easily maintained. And you still maintain that human capability, that wisdom.
Right.
And that's what I think people are getting wrong with the narrative, because the tech companies want you to outsource everything, sign on the dotted line, invest in us, and we'll sell to Google or to Microsoft. Right? And that's the game that's being played, but that doesn't help us. So I always think about the 20% capability that this technology gives you and the 80% human intuition and knowledge and teamwork and coordination that really is the differentiator, right? But that 20% is probably going to be a huge multiplier in terms of efficiency, because it's stuff that we just don't want to do.
Yeah.
Or it's
mundane tasks and mundane data gathering that can be automated.
24/7, 365 tasks that humans don't want to do all of the time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you had it on one of your slides there, the pyramid of I don't know what you
of
call
data.
it.
Yeah, just very traditional data, information, knowledge, and wisdom.
Yeah, and at the top is wisdom.
Yeah,
and that's something I think as an institution like Michigan State needs to keep in mind, is that's the critical point going and looking at the next 10 years. That's what we need to focus on is developing skill sets that will allow students after they graduate to really focus in on that wisdom and gain that wisdom, because it takes experience. I mean, it just doesn't happen overnight, right?
Yeah, I mean, you need the successes, you need the business as usual, you need the failures in the mix. I mean, wisdom comes from failing as much as it comes from like innovation, success, and the good days, right? Which is a small percentage of the time. Operations as usual is kind of the MO of how we're operating. But hey, those days when we screw up or something screws up that's out of our control, or there's an external problem with disease or weather or anything like that, they're the days that we actually build wisdom more than any other time, right?
Exactly.
And I think an institution like Michigan State University and what we're doing here, it's that groundswell of knowledge over the decades that really provides students and the industry as a whole with an opportunity to say, oh yeah, we've looked at that. We understand what can work and what will work. We also understand all the things that we tried that we can discount in a way, or we can go back and revisit them when maybe the time is right.
When I think of an important part of what is done at Michigan State as well is you look at these people in this room. This is a network of people that's been brought together, and I think that's going to be even a more critical as an institution moving forward, is to focus on that connection piece, focusing on building networks that can advance education, advance wisdom for those in the industry.
Without doubt, across every industry I speak about, the community is the most ignored thing.
That's probably the most important.
And it's the most important. Because I speak at about 50 conferences every year, and in the audience it's everything from like 70, 80 folks to like 3,000 people. That's the opportunity to really, build knowledge and build relationships. And, it's great when you turn up at a conference and people have been going to the same conference for many years, and they know each other very deeply, and they share their knowledge, and they're very open. I'm a big fan of open innovation and open knowledge. There's so much protectionism in the world that it's actually stifling true innovation, I feel.
Yeah. Now I want to quick turn toward the last topic of the day. The panel that's coming up after us is talking about energy.
Yes.
Very important.
Yes.
So one thing I believe a lot of people don't understand about, especially the artificial intelligence that's coming down the road here, is the amount of energy that it takes to be able to do all this computing that we're doing. And You look at, I was listening to a talk that the Secretary of Energy in the Trump administration was giving, and he was saying how China by 2050 is going to have is adding to their capabilities of energy 3x U.S. total output of energy in the next 25 years.
Right.
And they're doing that mostly because they see this wave of energy needed for all of this computing power to be dominant in the world in this area.
Correct.
Right. So how do we look at that? I mean, we're talking about circular, kind of a circular economy on the farm. Is there capabilities of farms being data centers for the future powered off of poop?
I mean, sure. I mean, earlier I was talking about anaerobic digesters and a number of different things. And, there's no one solution. So it's going to be solar and geothermal and wind and anaerobic digesters. And there's probably going to be some traditional fossil fuels in the mix, probably like gas generated electricity, maybe nuclear. Nuclear is very expensive and still quite a tricky energy source, even though it's getting its huge sort of attention right now with nuclear fusion sort of gaining pace. But if you look at what we're going to need from an energy perspective in the US, so they think that by 2030 or so, we're going to have about 10,000 data centers in the States. It's going to be about 9% of the total energy usage. Right? China's not necessarily sharing all of their new energy with us unless there's that global supergrid. And as I said, there's a fragmentation of the US energy network, right? So that's going to be a big, big problem to be able to just connect those two up. The interesting thing about China is the reason it's gone so far into electrification is it doesn't have its own oil and gas reserves, right? So China's future is personal sustainability and resiliency. And whilst they do have coal-fired electricity generators, they're going to be 100% renewables, and they're going to own that sort of pipeline of growth through solar. In fact, it's going to be growth almost 100% through solar with what they're doing, and they produce it there. They produce the panels there, produce the capabilities. Because of a totalitarian regime, they can put it wherever they want, right? They can just make the decision and they can mobilize it and build out the capabilities without any rules, regulations, and whatever. I'm not saying that's a good thing, right? It's not a good thing. But at the same time, that's how they work, right? So we're on an inevitable path towards electrification and renewable energy. It just works, right? And it's incredibly inconvenient for large traditional energy companies. And I've started chatting to traditional energy companies only this year. I've taken about 10 years off from chatting to them because they weren't very kind to me 10 years ago in Canada. They're very, very, very strong-minded in places like Alberta and such like, and really don't like it when you talk about renewable energy. And now they're inviting me to the table because it's like, what's the future of pipelines when no one's pumping oil anymore? What's the future of gas? What's the future of looking at a portfolio of capability that's going to be progressive and still here in 100 years' time? It's very interesting what's happening. Right now, pump the oil as much as you can, and they're doing it because they're going to hit a brick wall in about 15 years, I think. Yeah. And that's very scary to them. And I've had conversations with these companies. Yeah.
One more thing before they take the cane out and take us off the stage here. We need to hit on food. What is the fundamental shift that you see in culture that most people don't see coming that will impact how people eat in the future? Small question here to finish up.
Do you know what? Like tons of conversation about. Look, I think Weight Watchers has just gone into administration today, right? Why? GLP-1s, Ozempic, right?
It's a huge conversation.
Yeah, I was in Denmark last year, and Novo Nordisk were in the room, and they're making all the money and hiring all the people in Denmark. As many people, in fact, other companies in Denmark can't hire people, and equivalents are coming out. That, quite frankly, is having a massive, massive impact on the food system. There's also a lot of interesting stuff. So I was in Chicago with a bunch of food and beverage entrepreneurs and suppliers, and whilst there's challenges in terms of food supply and packaging and whatever at the moment, there's a diversity to the diet and what people want, and there's lots of new kinds of food coming into the mix. I was also asked a bunch of questions. What happens when we no longer import food? And it's like, you're back to seasonal produce in different regions across the States. And then that gets pretty bleak because, you don't have your pineapples and you don't have your avocados and you don't have your exotic fruits and you've got your potatoes, right?
Yeah. You end up like Ireland did.
And yeah. But it's kind of interesting, the slow, there's a bunch of things, the slow food movement, the 100-mile diet, and a number of things are kind of coming to pass in a way, But in these times of restriction comes a huge amount of creativity. And I actually think that we're in a huge renaissance in terms of incredible food entrepreneurs and incredible chefs and people really sort of taking us into whole new realms of what food is. I mean, I spoke about, cellular meat, and I spoke about plant-based proteins, and I spoke about fermentation. You can do that all on the doorstep here. Who's going to make the chocolate when Ghana no longer can grow cacao plants, right? It's going to be done in some kind of factory using cellular, using cells and using cellular growth. That's what the big companies are looking at, right?
Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Nickolas and some of the topics that we discussed around technology and the future that could be in agriculture. And once again, thank you to Michigan State University for allowing me to record this at the Dairy Symposium. Check out Nickolas's website. He's a very interesting guy. I had a chance to talk with him before and after we had our public discussion, and really enjoyed getting to know him. We'll put a link to his information in our show notes. A wealth of knowledge, works with some major companies around the world on helping them vision cast for what's coming in the future. So as always, if you got value out of this episode, we ask that you share it with somebody you know. That's how we grow our audience at the AgCulture Podcast. And also, if you'd be so kind as to leave a rating and review, we really appreciate that as well. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller. Thanks again for listening to the AgCulture Podcast.